Protecting the open internet is everyone's business.
Moderating the panel is Lokman Tsui. Round of applause for Mr. Lokman Tsui.
Thank you, Mong. Hi, everybody. My name is Lokman. I'm a professor at the Chinese University of Hong Kong. It's an incredible honor to be standing here in front of you and to introduce you to the panelists for the first panel on the open internet. Now, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to give a few remarks, and then I'll introduce the panelists to you. And then hopefully we'll have about 20-25 minutes time to answer any questions you might have and really have a conversation about what's going on with the open internet. So why am I standing here? Well, you know, I've been basically growing up on the internet, I think, and as many of you have been. When asked where I'm from, you know, there's a long answer, there's a short answer, but the real answer I usually want to give is, you know, it's the internet where my home is. Jhumpa Lahiri once said that home is the place that allows you to become, you know, who you want to be. And it is in that extent that, you know, the internet really has been the place that allowed me to become who I am and who I wanted to be. You know, it gave me the opportunity to build my first website, my first weblog. It gave me the chance to meet all of you here. And I think that's the thing that's, you know, we have in common, right? You know, the open internet is the thing that binds us, that connects us. And Global Voices wouldn't exist without the internet, obviously. The open internet is something that I have been researching as well for many, many years. And back then, you know, I think I wrote my master's thesis on internet censorship and regulation in China in 2001. So it's been something I've been researching for more than 10 years now. And back then, the internet was very different than, obviously, you know, the internet now. In many ways, the internet has improved and progressed, you know, and advanced. But at the same time, there have also been many threats to the internet. And, you know, if we care about this place that, you know, many of us call a home, then we need to understand what are the changes, what are the threats, you know, that facing our home, right? And so if we want to understand that and we want to do something about it, the first step is to understand a little bit better what's going on. So we have the incredible honor of 3 very esteemed, you know, panelists here, and I couldn't be more happy to introduce you to them. So on my left we have Al, who is the executive director for the Foundation of Media Alternatives. He's been doing a lot of work on ICT policy advocacy, and some of his more recent work focuses specifically on privacy rights advocacy. To his left is Nani Janssen, who is the legal director for the Media Defense Legal Initiative. And you know, if you have any question about legal threats, whether it's defamation, whether it's liability issues facing, you know, journalists, bloggers around the world, she's the person to go to. And then on the far left of mine is Ju, and she has been running a website called Prachatai for many, many years now. Actually, she made me say the following. I have to, where's the book? So not only Global Voices is celebrating its 10th anniversary, Prachatai is as well. And so this is a little book that reflects on the first 10 years of Prachatai. And Prachatai, for those of you who don't know, is an incredible website, an important website in Thailand, in a media environment where, you know, like certain issues are hard to discuss. The internet has given the Thai citizens, you know, the website Prachatai, where, you know, many, many things can be discussed, but where also they have been facing challenges precisely because, you know, they speak on issues that otherwise other people wouldn't speak on. Without further ado, I will let Lani do the first word. Please join me in welcoming Nani.
Which one? Is this? Yes, it's working. It'd be great if I could have my slides too. Yes, great. Thank you very much, Lokman, for the kind introduction, and thanks to everyone here for having me here. I'm trying to find a spot where I'm not blinded by the light. as Lokman just mentioned, I'm the legal director of the Media Legal Defense Initiative, an organization in London that works worldwide to help journalists, bloggers, and independent media defend their rights. The aim of this work that we do is to enable these bloggers and journalists to continue doing their work, publishing on matters of public interest. So basically to contribute to the free flow of information, which is also what the open internet, of course, is for all of us to be informed, to share views, to share critical views, all of which contributes to a properly functioning democracy. And that's basically what the link is to what I'm going to discuss today, legal threats to the open internet. I'm going to highlight the main challenges that we see to the open internet from the perspective of our practice at MLDI. We have about 100 cases in over 50 different jurisdictions. Not all of those are internet related, of course, but it does give us a fair idea of what's going on worldwide. I can only touch very briefly upon these things because I only have 10 minutes and I'll try my very best to stick to that. So by all means, ask questions about specific issues you want to talk about further when we have the Q&A afterwards. And also, throughout the day today and tomorrow, I'll be here for the rest of the weekend, so come talk to me. So many countries have adopted legislation specifically tailored to the internet and often with very bad results. The first example I wanted to mention here is India, where the IT Act, with its notorious Article 66A, makes it punishable by law to cause annoyance or inconvenience to other people with either online posts or even private email messages. And you can risk up to 3 years of imprisonment by doing that. The wording is clearly very imprecise and very vague, annoyance, inconvenience, and therefore very open to abuse. And it's very often used to suppress critical political speech in the country. There are a couple of constitutional challenges pending before the Indian Supreme Court at the moment, and MLDI is supporting one of those. The second example I wanted to mention is the Philippines, which has adopted a cybercrimes law that not only extends the traditional criminal libel laws to the internet, but even ups the ante a little bit. Offline libel is punishable by a maximum of 6 months imprisonment, but online defamation with a maximum of 6 years. Our partner in the Philippines, Center Law, has tried to challenge this law at the Constitutional Court here and was only partially successful. A number of the provisions were deemed to be unconstitutional, but unfortunately those provisions on criminal libel have remained in place. Then a third and final example I wanted to mention in this context is Azerbaijan, where, as we all know, a great deal of things are going very wrong at the moment. Azerbaijan pledged in 2006 to decriminalize defamation, but instead, in 2013, it adopted a law extending its libel laws to publication on the internet. And you can risk up to 3 years imprisonment when you violate that law. Where did my presentation go? Oh, that's me, sorry. The second main issue I want to highlight is the blocking of internet content at the discretion of the government, without a court order, due process, or any recourse against it. Thank you. The first example I want to mention is Zambia, where the Zambian watchdog had been blocked since about June, July 2013, from within Zambia. So it was accessible outside, but in Zambia itself it wasn't accessible, which of course is quite a big issue since it's one of the very few, very critical publications on Zambian politics. Reporters Without Borders set up a mirror site, which was then also blocked. There was a lot of uproar about this, and other government officials also put pressure on the Zambian government, and eventually in April last year the website was unblocked, and it has remained accessible mostly, except for a couple of weeks, I understand. In December last year it has remained accessible, so far so good. The second example I want to mention is Pakistan, where YouTube has been blocked for almost 2.5 years now. But not only YouTube, a number of other websites that provide independent news and make that accessible to the people there can be blocked at the complete discretion of the Pakistan Telecommunications Authority. They actually have no basis in law to do so, which is something that I found really shocking when I found out. Basically, any government ministry can contact the PTA and say, we want this and this contact taken offline, and it happens, and there's no formal way of challenging that. Bytes for All has been fighting to get YouTube reopened in Pakistan, but also to get a proper system in place with checks and balances to make sure that there's more transparency and actually a way to challenge this blocking. We've been supporting that case as well, and it's at a rather crucial point at the moment. The High Court has said as much as that it really wants to unblock YouTube, but it needs some more guidance from the Supreme Court in order to do so, so to be continued. The third issue I wanted to flag is unclear and unreasonable intermediary liability standards. The case of Prachatai is famous. We have Chiranuch here, so I will not talk about that too much, so we can talk about that with her later on. I do want to flag the case of Delphi in Estonia, which is an online publisher that was held liable for user comments on its website. This case was litigated all the way up to the European Court of Human Rights, which then foolishly handed down a really nonsensical decision upholding the decision of the Estonian courts to hold Delphi accountable. Fortunately, you can still go to the Grand Chamber at the European Court, and the case has been referred there. And MLDI, together with a group of international publishers, has filed an amicus brief with the court, pointing out that the court should at least take into account the framework that has been developed by the European Court of Justice, which meaning applying the e-commerce directive, which only allows for a very limited liability for intermediaries for content that wasn't produced by themselves, but also pointing to comparative law examples, so the regime in the US, which is a lot more liberal, and also pointing out best practices with the hundreds of online publishers that thrive basically by allowing user comments on their websites. Decision on that is forthcoming any day now, so we're looking at that in suspense. The next section, I will be very brief. We called threats currently flying under the radar. The previous one are kind of the bigger ones, but the next things I wanted to highlight very briefly are just kind of perhaps slightly less obvious, but could be just as dangerous to the open internet. The first one I wanted to flag is the application of traditional media laws to the online context. Obviously, publishing online is very different in nature than it is to traditionally, publish in print, etc. And applying traditional media law standards to the online context brings with it a lot of risks. And the law that was adopted in August 2014 in Russia, the so-called bloggers law, is a good example of that. It makes applicable to any website or blog that has over 3,000 visitors, obligations that also apply to offline media. This means that they have to comply with a lot of administrative obligations. They have to log information about the number of visitors that they have. They have privacy regulations to comply with, but it also places restrictions on content, such as political content, that will be limited under this law. And violating these regulations comes with very hefty fines. Another example is using other types of legislation to curtail online publication. I listed Italy here because it's actually a country in which it's quite difficult to get information removed from the internet on grounds of defamation. You need a proper court order for that, which is only right. But you see that a lot of people then seek recourse in, for example, copyright claims. So, and because people usually get very scared by receiving an angry lawyer letter, they remove all the content that might be objectionable rather than just a teeny tiny bit that might infringe on copyright. Which brings me to my next and final point, and that is legal proceedings. Often the uncertainty of the outcome, the duration, and also the cost of legal proceedings makes people kind of overreact or react very hastily when they're faced with an angry lawyer letter, basically. An individual blogger might think, oh my God, this is going to cost me an awful lot and all the stress and everything, my house, my mortgage, let me just take all that content offline right away. But also larger organizations, companies, can have a policy of just rather removing content than dealing with all the hassle of going through any legal proceedings. This is very understandable, of course, but it's also a shame sometimes from a freedom of expression point of view. I always like to say that it's important that there are people who fight back, but it's of course very difficult to do that on your own. And I just wanted to stress that we're here to help, and I should now probably stop because my time is up. But by all means, come talk to me, and I hope we'll have a nice discussion later. Thank you.
Morning, everyone.
Oops.
Hi. It's my honor to be here and talk with you guys who are very cool and very supportive in my work in Thailand. Okay. Nani start with the kind like a very good time. It's so frustrating for me, and she's a grade A student, as she like answer all the professor question. I don't, sorry, the professor. Okay, I think probably you who are not in Thailand probably not used to this, but this is a screen in the television in Thailand since 22nd May for a week. The television screen is shown like this because we have a coup, another coup in, in 22nd May. And yeah, and some Farang in this was it mean foreigner, especially for the white, who probably like just watch the television from one of the cable TV through. They're just like curious, what happened to that BBC, what happened to that CNN? It's just like this, what happened? And this is the gate at the subway station, one of the gate at subway station nearby the Sunday market or Chatuchak market, which it was closed because of they have some like a rumor or some news that there will be a protester to do a protest against the coup there. So the military order to close the MRT or the station is a way to block the people to do the protest or to act. I think if some of you probably follow the news, there are some like the way that the Thai people try to find their creative way to protest, like a three single fresh salute. This is a way I think they follow from like the Hunger Games to show like they want like accept the military rules. So this is the way that. And unbelievable, even just do that is not peaceful enough. It's already stabilized the national security, so they not allow us to do that. If you do, you will be in like take to attitude adjustment for a while, for a week, as they have kind of like the authorization to do that. Or you probably can be file a case against you if you used to post something online, and they probably can discover some content online. It probably can be considered as a less malicious content. Some people been filed a lawsuit against that. So this is a very harsh way to suppress the people to express. Then people didn't give up. Some of the people tried to put sticker on the public spot. That is like the symbol as a three fresh finger salute. And the number 2 + 2 = 4. This is, I don't know, probably some of you familiar with the viral video clip on YouTube about like a teacher who tried to teach students about like 2 + 2 = 5. So this is a way that to say no is we just not just like the obedience. we not obey for the wrong answer. We can have our right answer by ourselves. So this is the way of the resistance to show. And as a offline also limit, and online also been surveillance, been like the observed heavily in Thailand. So, like after a week, after months that the people kept going out and got arrested, and then, okay, people going out less and try to watch what gonna happen next. Some people want to share their like the solidarity, but they don't know how to do to be like a safe and to send a message to the people who doesn't go online also. Usually people can go out on the street, do the protest, but then a friend of mine, I don't know who she or he is, they buy the advertisement in the classified section to advertise the poem. This is a poem to give like kind of like the encouragement of the people, like in the darkness, we still have hope to rising up one day. So it's a kind of like a try to do this thing. Until like since May until now, we are live under the martial law for 8 months throughout the country. And actually, for the deep south of Thailand, it's for 10 years. And this year, the law is so obsolete because it's already 100-year anniversary of the martial law. So how can we live under the very draconian law? But we are right now. And as Nani mentioned about my case, in 2008, 2009, I got arrested. And because of like, I run the website, I run the web forum, and the people, I got arrested on that cause. And this is come from the law, the Computer Crime Act, which is passed a year after, or less than a year after the previous coup. It's one of the law that concern of the internet freedom in Thailand, pretty much. And for the recent coup, I am afraid that we will have another law, another set of law, not just only one law. It's called the series of the digital economy bills, which is waiting to be passed. It's alarm the concern among the Thai public who follow about this, but it's probably not loud enough because this will include about like the amendment of the Computer Crime Act in the worsen trend, in the worsen amendment, and also the cybersecurity bill, which is allow the government to intercept the information of the individuals, of the organization, and also amend the National Telecommunication and National Broadcasting and Telecommunication Commission, which is like to weaken the power of the NBTC and like install the power of the military in the media regulation. So it's come like a 10+3 law set. I could not finish to study the law yet. I try. I think we have to speed fast because the law will be passed so fast. It's already passed the cabinet and it's waiting for the law office of the government to approve, and then if it approved, we'll go to the National Legislation Assembly, which is kind of like the rubber stamp parliamentary. So I think this is something that the netizen in Thailand has to speed up. So this is, I worry that it can be a new thing that's come after the coup. As the previous coup, we got the Computer Crime Act, and this time we got at a set. I think this is like after the coup, the group who are very obvious to see, to be proactive in the expression is the young people, who most of them are digital native. I talked with one of the IT students. I told them that, we are conduct the study on the new media regulation. He asked me, what is the new media? Because for him, he growing up with the media, which he considered new. It's not new for them anymore. So these kinds of the people are the fundamental, are the ground of the society. And this is I think it's a very interesting phenomenon for Thai society. There are the kind of punishment that happened in the girls' school in Bangkok, the famous girls' school in Bangkok, because of the girl come to the school late, and then the teacher punished them to like walk on knee for like the quite long distance on the cement pad. Then the student, hundreds of students use Twitter. I think the teachers, probably many of them don't know Twitter. So the students use Twitter to post the photo into the Twitter and Instagram, and they put a hashtag of the SN fact. SN is an acronym of their school name. And it's going like in the trending topic. And the popular media, like Thailand, the biggest newspaper in Thailand, picked this news to bring up. So I think this is show how like the traditional ways to treat the young people is probably not work anymore. I think this is something I probably say in the first round. Actually, I prepare more for this, but I don't know if my time is finished or not. Oh, okay. So then I think I do my homework a little bit to pressure Lokman. For me, I think from my experience and observation about the threat to the openness of the internet, I think one of my observations is that online and offline cannot separate. It affects each other, especially if you live in the country that you didn't have freedom offline. Then you feel happy with the online freedom, but soon later, they will come after you for sure. So I think this is one thing. And in many countries, including in my country, we play with the cat and mouse game for a long time. It's tiring of the cat and mouse game, especially most of the mouse is a little mouse, not a big mouse, not a giant mouse. The little mouse that's been kept in jail for a continuity. Since the coup, numbers of the less-majors accused increasing. Until now, I cannot count how many of them. And many of them are the Facebook user, which has been as under the martial law, some of them already been processed to the military court. I think this is something that we have to be follow up very carefully and very closely. And another thing is about the internet. The good thing is because it's across the globe, it's not belong to any particular country. But the thing that the government try to do, the state try to do, is try to regulate within their territory, or they want to regulate across the territory, but they can't. They can't, not yet. But I am afraid that if they start to do country by country and come to be as a trend of the globe, it will be the worrying. So I think we need to ask for the friends who live in the freedom, more freedom than others, probably have to, the government in that country, have to stand firm to be the examples of other repressive countries. And also the corporation need to be stand firm for the rights of their user. And the threat that I saw, I think people is a threat. And also people is a power. The power of the people can be threat and can be the solution. Because in my country, not just only government try to come after the people who express or practice their freedom. It's also a group of the extremists, or even not extremists, just ignorance, or just someone who follow the stream of the society. They do something very nasty to the team. They still have to listen to the people. We may need to sending our voice louder. Thank you so much.
Small technical problem. Sorry. I'd just like to introduce myself first. My name is Alegre from Foundation for Media Alternatives. I'm a Filipino, so it's our honor to welcome you. Thank you for coming to the Philippines. We've gone through a lot of hardships, disasters, political disasters as well. So I think holding it here is very uplifting to my people. So thank you very much. Maayong buntag means good morning in Cebu. And Cebu, can I give you a couple of important details about Cebu? Just a couple. One, for people who have been around and you've looked around that there are monuments to a very important hero in the Philippines, Lapu-Lapu. Does anybody know Lapu-Lapu? Yeah, Lapu-Lapu was one of the natives here who probably was one of the first who resisted colonization, and his tribes at that time, they were based around this area, repelled the first wave of Spanish colonialists in the 1600s. So you are in very hallowed ground for Filipino activists. Number two, Cebu is very important to internet activists as well, because Cebu was the venue for the Philippine. We are celebrating last March 29th. We're having a one-year celebration of the 20th year of the Philippine Internet. In March 29 of 1994, the Philippines was connected for the first time to the Internet. And do you know where that first connection happened? In Cebu. So while I was dribbling the ball, they're still not getting. So I will present something more from the privacy point of view. But ano nangyari? Naghang. Ayan na. Restart? Okay, restart nila. So my presentation will 10 or maybe 12 minutes if I have a part for gender, which my gender colleagues will kill me if I don't mention anything about women. So I will ask for additional 2 minutes. First is, from a privacy point of view, one of the biggest threats right now is the reality of digital surveillance. So privacy in the internet, the question of surveillance, and of course you all know the Snowden revelations, and that's just the tip of the iceberg when the snow hit the fan, no? But that's the so I'll give a bit. I was supposed to show some very quick slides about how digital surveillance happens. And then second, to go into the global trends about surveillance, which is very important. And I will mention about 3 or 4 global trends. And then the third part will be really on, the title of this session is An Open Internet. Why should we be involved? No? We are all involved in open internet. So several years ago, we had a bit of a hard time convincing other activists that privacy was an important matter for freedom of expression and other human rights. Well, with the Snowden thing, everybody sees the connection now, but then it was not so easy. So I would end, hopefully, with yan. Oh. Wala pa rin. Okay na. Just in time. Yeah. The title I gave, sorry for the delay. Thank you for your patience. Protecting the open internet is everyone's business. There's censorship happening in Cebu, I'm sorry. No, let me do it. Okay. The alternative title to this presentation is, yeah, 1984 in 2015. Yeah, this is the roadmap we wanted to do. So, reintroducing digital surveillance, basically what we want to impress right now is the technology is very cheap, it's very available. This is how mobile phone location-based tracking happens. Of course, everybody knows that everybody is tracked via our cell phones, no? And the equipment is very small, very cheap, and the technology is quite easy to learn. If a government, for example, were to do programmatic communication surveillance, they would just plug into the back doors of telcos using the 3 Cs through coercion, or through cooperation, or through corruption. They will pay off certain telcos or engineers to get data. And this extends to the satellite sphere, no? And online, everybody here has probably used Skype in the past couple of days. And I'm sorry to have to say that Skype is found to be unsecured. And this is an article of the New York Times where it's a graphic from that article which basically says that there are techniques some governments use to bypass the encryption protocols of Skype. Another important factor here is the role of private companies. And many organizations which you belong to or are allied with have already pinpointed a lot of these. Recently, there has been a lot of important information coming out about how big companies are helping governments. Well, this is the sort of the mother of all. Who doesn't know about the Snowden revelations? I guess everybody does know. So, when that was the slide of one of the slides that came out. The yellow circles basically are when the biggest internet companies of the world joined the PRISM program, which compelled them to turn over data, user data, to the National Security Agency. But it's not just the Americans. Of course, there's the Five Eyes network, but it's many governments are demanding data from governments. So our moderator was formerly of Google, and this is one of the revelations of Google, that there's been a marked rise in the number of requests for user data by government. But of course, Google will not escape our, our assessment, because Google has also been put to task for some privacy violating practices. This is the Google Street View technology. They were mapping street maps, and they were found to have, well, privacy advocates raised a howl in Europe, because while they were scanning with cars which had cameras, they were taking images of people sunbathing, having sex, doing private things. So it was a problem. But that was not the worst of it. The worst of it was when they were passing through the streets, their equipment had the capacity to sniff out unprotected Wi-Fi signals, and they were able to harvest a lot of usernames and passwords. In the Philippines, Nani mentioned that the cybercrime law, which we opposed, has passed, but not without a fight and with some, at least, of the onerous provisions taken away. So the reality of digital surveillance, and this is where I met Nani, by the way, in the freedom of expression meetings in Bangkok with then Special Rapporteur Frank LaRue. And this is probably the most comprehensive report of how privacy and surveillance has impacted on human rights. So I would advise you to read it. It's in the public domain. So it's now acknowledged in the highest levels of global governance. Okay, very quickly, here are about 3 or 4 trends that privacy advocates have basically accepted as fact. One, there is excessive communication surveillance. Governments are increasingly intercepting communications. They're requiring providers to aid governments. Can you imagine after the Charlie Hebdo incident, the discourse again will shift towards we need more surveillance, we need more data to be turned over to governments. The disturbing trend here is a lot of this is usually unsupervised and unwarranted. A human rights protection would be legal court orders for some of these things, but because of the quote-unquote war on terror, this has been superseded by more extra-legal means. The second basic trend that we are seeing is enhanced transactional surveillance. Transactional surveillance refers to how we live our lives now online using our devices and the internet and mobility. So, and we leave transaction records all over when we shop, when we make a phone call, when we go to the hospital and have ourselves treated, when we even move from place to place. So locational. So the trends are there are increasing legal access to these data while reducing the safeguards and human rights protections. There is increasing illegal or extra-legal access. And then for the commercial sector, the default for online services is you turn over what we have this poster which we will, I think we have a few more copies. We have this poster, I'm sure some of you have seen it, that in the internet, if the product is free, yeah, we are the product. So we always ask this in our workshops. So why do you think you have free Google or free Facebook or free Instagram? What is the business model? The business model is us. If you do not pay for the product, you are the product. And then longer data retention. Another trend is increased identification tracking of individuals. So from anonymity on the internet to increased individual identification, biometrics is playing a greater role. You don't even have to be tagged by pictures in the near future. There will be face recognition, etc., etc. So, and their governments are sharing this, etc. And locational things, our devices are linking us to who we are, what we do, and track our movements. Centralized data flows. If we have time, we can talk about big data as Big Brother. But for now, the internet, the technologies that give us so much joy and satisfaction on the internet is also the technology that could hurt us. So we have to be very aware of that. I'll just skim through a lot of the Snowden leaks because you know about this. What do we know now? Access to communications metadata, tapping of fiber optic cables. Can you imagine that? And this was what's bothersome to the technical community, breaking of encryption standards and infiltration of standards bodies. This is where a lot of technologists are up in arms, because these standards were community-based and innovations to make the internet run better, including encryption to protect it. But the revelations have told us that part of the game has been to infiltrate these standards bodies to make the standards more susceptible to surveillance. It's common practice, hacking. Can you imagine with all the companies they had submitting data, how much of your chats, your emails, your address books are there? And this I always cite to business people when we give this to the private sector, the hacking of the SWIFT financial system. Okay. The fallout has been at the highest levels of global governance. It has been tackled, and a resolution on the right to privacy on the digital age is on the table now for the General Assembly. It has been approved in the Human Rights Council. Last, why is it our business? And this, we've always had all sorts of answers on why is that important, Al? Why should we be involved with that? Isn't privacy the shield for corruption, etc.? And we say it's all linked, and everybody has a digital footprint, and that's what the first vector of surveillance is really us and our behavior on the internet. And can you imagine all of those on the right? These are all that's where you live. That's where we all live. I was going to show you a Philippine example, but I have to wrap up. And then, by way of a conclusion, I just like to say that what helped right now is to make the link between privacy and other rights. So, especially when we talk to media people, and Global Media Voices is really citizens' media at its best, we would like to really say that, one, there is complementary of rights in the human rights regime that we have. We cannot be selective of what rights to protect. Free expression, yes. Privacy, no. It doesn't work that way. It's indivisible. And our analysis, I hope you agree that most of these violations are interconnected, and they are in the arsenal of states and corporations, which use both. They have a chilling effect on free expression. Why, you may ask? If you know that you're being surveilled, would you be as free to talk about your government? You will be free to talk and dissent. So that is the effect of surveillance, of privacy violations. And you will see this type of news all over, that the same technologies that are used to surveil have the capacity to block. And I will end with, and this is what we show at the end of our workshops on how to link freedom of expression and privacy. This is the reason why Philippines, which has a free and freewheeling media, is still on the worst places to be a journalist list. And this is the Ampatuan massacre, which claimed 63 people, 31 media people. The single worst incident of journalism violence in history happened in these islands. And of course, the question is, before they were killed, before they were ambushed in an area which had a ridge so they could bulldoze the bodies into the ridge. their movements were monitored, their communication were monitored. They knew that most of the persons of interest were traveling that day all together. So what we're saying is, in ending impunity, privacy rights are very important, and it's very important to connect our rights. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody. First of all, I guess I'm sorry that we start off the public summit with such a downer of a panel. But I see my job as sort of setting the bar really, really low so we can only go up in the next 2 days. So as I said, like when I first started going online, I considered the internet my home. But obviously, like as the panelists have shown us, the internet, I remember back when I went online, there were no companies, on the internet. There were no governments on the internet. And obviously, like that has changed a lot. As you can see from the panelists, and I think we got a very interesting range of views, a legal perspective, as particular important case study of Thailand, and then also how surveillance increasingly has been changing the internet, something that Rebecca and Ethan have written a lot about, how we went from a largely anonymous internet to internet where, like it's really hard to stay anonymous at this point. With that, I really want to thank again the panelists, and I also want to open up the floor for any kind of questions you have. If you have a question, please introduce yourselves and tell us your name, and then also please be specific about who you're directing the question to.
Hi, my name is Owen. I'm from China. My question is about censorship in my country, and if I may, I want to direct my question to our speaker from the Chinese University of Hong Kong. I think one of the interesting things about internet censorship in China is that on the one hand, you are seeing the blocking of many news websites like the New York Times. Global Voices also included. Presumably for some of the touchy issues it covers from China and also elsewhere. But on the other hand, I think you've seen a flourishing of Chinese homegrown news websites like WeChat and Weibo. So on the one hand, I think the Chinese government really considers this as a kind of a steam valve where people can vent their anger online without directly confronting the government. But on the other hand, I think they're worried about the equivalent of an Arab Spring to be happening in China. So I think the Chinese government has this love and hate relationship with social media. And if I may, my question is, what do you think the online censorship would involve in China under the new leadership of Xi Jinping? Thank you.
I don't think it's very good. I think, I mean, undeniably, the Chinese government has played a really important role in making sure that the internet is widely available, and that the internet speeds are fast, So if you take the past, what is it now, 20 years, I think, at this point, the internet first became commercially available in 1995 in China. There are many places in the world where the internet is like very low speed, not available, right? And that's not the case in China. In China, there are like 600 million people now online, I think. So that's the best case. The worst case, obviously, is that the internet is not the internet as we know it in China. It has been largely, if you want to call it that way, protected. And I think the problem is that it's not part of the global internet. It's not part of the open internet that we all know and love. And while it might have been able to grow certain apps, right, software websites, very specifically to China, I think the analogy you want to make is, like Charles Darwin when he went to the Galapagos Islands, and there were species that were able to grow because they were not competing, they had no competition of other, like animals and predators, right? But for for all of us, if we want to best internet to have, we need to be, able to, to connect with each other, to challenge each other, and to have that conversation with each other. And if you look at all kinds of data, the internet in China largely at this point is not in conversation with the rest of the world, whether it is on a sort of business level, right, or whether it's on a citizen level. And there's a lot more that can be done, and so that's, I think, one way to look at it. The Xi administration, there was some initial hope that they might be more liberal or might be more open-minded. I think so far that hasn't been really the case. If you looked at, the kind of policies they've been exerting and practicing. And so, one thing with power is that, it's hard to give it up once you have it, and they have all kinds of reasons to say, we need more power, give us a little bit more freedom because, security is important, harmony is important. But once you have it, it's really hard to give it up. And I think, like in the Chinese case, that's very clear. I don't see any incentive for any moment at this point for them to give up a lot of, give back a lot of freedom to the citizens at this point. Next question.
Hi, I'm Pornoy from Taiwan. I want to direct my question to our panelists from Thailand. Sorry, I can't remember. Okay, as far as I know, Thailand is such a wonderful place for tourists around the world to, to visit. But however, after so many things happening in Thailand, from your presentation, I know there's a lot of surveillance or a lot of censorship happening in Thailand right now, but what can maybe foreigners or tourists do? Because as a Taiwanese, we visit Thailand and we love Thailand, but a lot of tourists like me may just go to Thailand, go to Bangkok, and don't know what's happening there. And is there anything, if not just people, activists can do, not just local activists, what can global citizens or tourists who visit Thailand can do, and what should we, how can we react? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think Taiwan and Thailand is very similar. People confuse a lot. Are you from Thailand? Taiwan? Something like that, always. Yeah. I think good news, tourists is back to Thailand, even under the martial law. So the business, the tourism business, it seems like it can go on. Good news. But it's also sad because it seems like the thing that happens in the country is not much be seen by the foreigner, as you point out. I still encourage people to visit. No? I don't think we are in the point to the boycott or to ask for that yet, because the country still need to going on. But I probably think about this day, probably people in Thailand sometimes it's not easy to speak what they want to speak. So in terms of like if we can have some channel to link the information to each other and can speak out from outside the country for the many issues that concern, that's probably helpful, because these days many academics also has to fret the country because the academic freedom also under threat, and also the activists, hundreds of activists or the local activists has to fret out from the country. So the person who try to survive in the country, the activists who try to survive in the country, has to pray very carefully, like to touch at the limit and a little bit beyond the limit, but not too far, as we would like to continue our fighting, our activity in the country. So I think it's very helpful if like the friends or the people from outside Thailand can help. And actually there are some of our activists who live in other countries. If they probably need some support also when they're fled out from the country. Thank you.
you, Lokman. And thanks to all the panelists for really important comments that you're making. My name is Rebecca McKinnon. I'm a co-founder of Global Voices. And I just have one question. There, of course, is a lot of what I like to call hand-waving and freaking out by governments around the world, but now particularly in the West, about terrorism and the use of social networks by terrorists. And there are a lot of calls coming from governments in Europe, and particularly right now, but also a lot of politicians in the United States calling for social media companies, internet companies to do more to crack down on the use of the internet, the use of social media by terrorists. And of course, we know from the list of people who've been jailed around the world, and if you look at the reports of bloggers and investigative journalists who've been jailed around the world, many of them are jailed on charges of quote unquote terrorism. So this is obviously a concern about what the impact of these calls for more crackdowns and calling for media, for internet companies to play a more aggressive role in controlling activities of users, where this is going to lead. So I'm wondering what you think our community's response should be. Should our community perhaps kind of issue sort of a response to the world's governments about, you know, our concerns, or how we think they should respond to this concern in a responsible way that's compatible with human rights? What response should we be giving, or what instructions should we be giving to companies about how they should be responding to these government demands to control users on the internet in case they might be terrorists? What should our community be doing?
One thing I wanted to show, if we had time, was the website of necessaryandproportionate.org. It's a website that outlines 13 principles for human rights protection for mass surveillance, against mass surveillance. Okay. Let's be clear, the terrorism threat is provoking a response of more surveillance. Okay. We have to find out who before they do it, we have to monitor everybody, etc., etc. So, though we cannot deny the state's right to protect its citizens, quote unquote, I think the battle has to be waged in whatever surveillance mechanisms are put in place, have human rights protections. And Necessary and Proportionate.org has 13 principles. You can search it now. And it has been signed by more than 400 NGOs, including Global Voices, including our organization, including many of yours. And it is an important tool that we think we should lobby with our own governments in terms of, if you are to amend our wiretapping law, if you are to put in more anti-terror legislation, we should audit this with certain human rights protections and principles. I think that is the only way, because we cannot go and say that do not surveil us, because the public opinion, especially after bombings and terrorist attacks, would really be for, so what is the state doing? So I think what we have to have is an arsenal of clear principles and arguments which have been vetted by human rights lawyers, by even governments. And that's why I'm happy, because some governments are already starting to adopt it. I think Sweden has said that 7 or 8 of those principles we will abide by. Maybe Nani has something more to, do you know?
I'd like to add something. Thank you very much. Just from the legal perspective, when earlier on the long list of names was read out, that sadly included a large number of cases that MLDI is also working on, and that includes the case of Eskinder Nega and of Rio Talemu. And I mentioned this example. We were representing them at the African Commission to challenge not only their imprisonment, but also the anti-terrorism law under which they were prosecuted. The argument that we hear back from Ethiopia constantly and from many other governments that they base their legislation on UK and US anti-terror laws. I need to mention there that they kind of took out any checks and balances that were inserted in that legislation. But that's kind of a blanket excuse that you hear a lot in these types of cases. And this also underlines how important it is to be very vigilant whenever there are calls to change legislation, to increase the powers of government, that those checks and balances are indeed in place. I mean, there are very clear principles that say that journalism doesn't equate terrorism, but it also say that when implementing anti-terrorism measures, human rights principles should be taken into account. And this is something that needs to be stressed all the time, and particularly in times of crisis, when there's a huge outcry, and therefore much more leniency in Parliament, but also by the public at large, to kind of accept these increased measures.
Thank you so much. As I said, we tried to set the bar really, really low, so we can only go up from here. Can you join me in giving our panelists one more round of applause?